I hope that you've had a good week. I haven't streamed much. I've been doing a lot of writing, and it's probably going to continue that way. I think that my YouTube contributions are going to be a little more infrequent just because I do a lot more writing projects lately. Now, next week I am supposed to have either on Monday or Wednesday a stream with a certain individual who's been criticizing my coverage of Nicaragua, my criticism of Jamarl Thomas for not covering it at all. Now, one of the things is I think he doesn't understand what the debate is about. So let me clarify a couple things. I'm not in favor of U.S. intervention in South America militarily. In fact, the sanctions I think are not even necessary, whether it's in Venezuela or in Nicaragua or in most of these other countries where the U.S. has adversarial relationships with these governments. I think that in most of these cases they are going to collapse and implode on themselves. It's something that happened in Romania in 1989 for economic reasons. You see, with a lot of these communist states that they adopt a very tough line internationally, they sort of begin to believe in all of these vanity projects. And in Romania, which I remember watching a number of documentary films about it, and also I knew somebody that one of my first bosses was a Romanian immigrant, and he's not really proud about being Romanian, but he did discuss with me a couple of times when I asked him about it. Um, you have people who they rise to the apex of power. They contract. They basically concentrate as much of the executive powers in their hands as possible, as many state powers in the hands of the executive as they can, and then they start to make erratic decisions, and that's how it happened over there with Ceausescu. That's how it's happened in Venezuela and in Nicaragua, and you can probably do 5 hours of streaming on Nicaragua. I think in this case, I've decided I have much more material on this than I need to than I have to fill just 1 hour stream or something. So this I'm hoping I can do in an hour and a half or less. But essentially, I've been criticizing Jamarl Thomas for basically ignoring larger crimes happening in Nicaragua than have been happening in Gaza. Okay, and those that don't understand what I mean, there's an express goal among a lot of these protesters in Gaza to be either wounded or killed approaching an international border, knowing that there is an armed force on the other side prepared to stop them from getting to the other side. And they have the express goal of also, if not getting shot or killed, also of liberating Jerusalem. And you know what that is. That is a military goal. Okay, you don't nobody talks about invading, or I guess if you want a more neutral term, performing an incursion into enemy territory in order to take over that territory and calls that a peaceful demonstration. That's not even. I mean, in what country, by what standard is that peaceful? So you have over there have been, I believe that there's 130 or so people dead. Meanwhile, in Nicaragua, as of this week, and this is in a shorter period of time because this started in April, whereas what happened what the fuck is going on there? I think it's the camera. But what happened in Nicaragua has taken the lives of 170 people since April, so it's a shorter period of time. What's happened in Nicaragua has nothing to do with international dispute or a border issue. It has to do with students who did rise up, as well as some workers and other grassroots people. And they're opposing a number of Social Security cuts and tax increases by the government of Daniel Ortega. But I would say that you do have to go a little deeper. And I've been saying for a while that it's linked to a number of other issues. It's linked to the fact that Nicaragua, like a number of other states that are part of the pink revolution, as some people would like to call it, they have created an unsustainable economic model. And in order to keep it solvent for many years, and it's not going to be solvent for long, they've beholden their country to other countries that are basically taking over their economies, if at all. We're talking about China. We're talking about Russia. We're talking about Iran. We're talking about Cuba to a certain extent. Even though I don't believe Cuba gets a ton of economic yield, they're able to export a lot of their doctors. They have more doctors that have the ability to practice in Cuba than they have facilities that are competent to actually receive them. Okay, so they don't have they're training all these doctors and they're sending them to Venezuela. And meanwhile, Cuba's own medical system is spotty at best in parts of the country. So to focus on Nicaragua, let me see if there's anybody in the chat before we start. Ryu is here. Welcome back. The audio is really low. What can I do about that one? Let's see here. Is it any better? Raise your microphone level by 30. Is that any better, guys? I want to say hi to Metadata Man, Ryu Shiska. Let me know if the audio is any better. Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Okay, way better. Thank you. So, yeah. Let me pop this chat out. I'll put this over here. Okay, so I have somebody I'm going to probably be debating next week, and he's been trying to say that a lot of this is bullshit and that it is an issue that is being propagated by the imperialist American right. And this is something where they misunderstand totally what I'm talking about. Steve Turkey. I see that comment. I was going to talk about Colombia earlier this week, and then I got busy with this. So, maybe later in the day or tomorrow night, I might do a little commentary on Colombia. But what I'm trying to say is this, okay? I don't know how many times I have to say this, but yeah, I know Steve Turley. I don't believe in U.S. interventionism in Latin America. I've said several times in my broadcasts, either with Carlos or with other people, that the U.S. should be focusing on having a good relationship with its Latin American neighbors, and not an adversarial one. For example, the 2002 coup in Venezuela, which a lot of people on the left say was an improper, and not just improper, was an imperialist American intervention in Venezuela. I would say that you can't dispute the fact that it was something improper and that it set back U.S. relations with Latin America for decades. For decades, it was a huge disaster. The fact that it failed was a different issue altogether. But assuming it would have succeeded, it would have been more proof that the United States does not believe in actually having a respectful relationship with other countries in this hemisphere. So, while I would say that I would never support Chavez, knowing what I do now, even though since then my politics have certainly changed. Probably in 2002 I would have said, give Chavez a chance. But what people are trying to say is that, well, you're just swallowing right-wing propaganda from people like the Organization of American States, Louis Almagro, who is, they're saying he's an imperialist shill. So I would say this. if you want to find correct information on what's going on, you don't have to take the side of either the OAS or the Nicaraguan government or Telesur. You just go to the actual data itself, and you go to and you look at some trends that are happening. So there's certain things that happen that indicate where the course of the country is going. When you're talking about Nicaragua, and you're trying to say, well, the only problems that are happening there have been caused by the OAS and American imperialism, you're actually removing the agency of the government itself. So then, when that happens, what's the point of even having an independent government in Nicaragua? What's the point of having Daniel Ortega be in power? Reven Starkiller is from Brazil. I saw him in the chat a few moments ago, and he's had, Brazil is one of the top economies in the world. In terms of having a large manufacturing base and everything, and they had a government, and basically, they shat the bed. They led the country into a major recession, which we could go on into a different time. And Reven's, you know what, Reven, I want to invite you because the last person I had about Brazil she's not willing to come back because she's not, she doesn't really want to talk about Brazil at the moment. So, these things, there's a certain point where you say, okay, let's accept that there's some imperialist influence going on. Let's accept that the United States has improperly interfered with the Western Hemisphere and other countries around the world. Let's accept that. But when you have a government, your responsibility is not to blame past problems that other governments have caused you at the expense of the welfare and prosperity of your own citizens. And that's basically my position. And I'm hoping that this current thing in Nicaragua will lead to the resignation of Daniel Ortega without too much bloodshed. And then there would be probably a constitutional reform and a new election, and the president would have to relinquish some of their power. So, Reven Starkiller, if you want to email me, we can talk about setting up a time. It'll probably be a little difficult to set up pretty soon, but this is my email. But in any case, let's dive into it. So I have a person I'm debating probably next week about this. And sorry, I've gone 13 minutes with my whole introduction. So I have this blog post. This is on my personal blog that I wrote on before the Real News Network. Or the Hard News Network. I don't write for the Real News Network, and you'll see why soon. So there's certain things I write on my own blog that I don't think are really of interest to the Real News Network, the Hard News Network. That sucks. And it says, for news on Nicaragua, don't turn to the Real News Network. So here, I'll start reading. Recently, one of my critics sent me a clip from the Real News Network in an effort to debunk what he calls my bias about Nicaragua. This is a person who believes that it is improper for citizens of the USA to criticize Venezuela and Nicaragua because of our past Cold War intervention in Latin America, as well as what he classifies as our neoliberal agenda that causes poverty in the region. I will address this criticism today, as well as discuss the video that this critic sent me point by point. You cannot read the URL. The URL for this blog post is actually in the description. So let me do this. So if you, John Sislowski, go to the video itself. If you're in my video, go. Okay, so you have it. So this is the video below, and I have my new stylus here. I bought this at Walmart yesterday, the neo-imperialist Walmart, right? I actually hate going there, but it's actually gotten a bit better. So we're going to be using this a lot. Is that Danny Ortega in the brown shirt next to Maduro? I thought it was Cheech. Well, I mean, Ortega has kind of aged a bit from his youthful days. What is the URL? I'll put the URL. I'll just put it in the chat because I can put URLs. I don't think you guys can. By the way, if anybody's trying to send me a URL, you can't do it in live chat. That's why I'm giving you my email. It's a new show email. So I will address this criticism today, as well as discuss the video that this critic sent me point by point. So we're going to open this video. And I'm going to have to flip back and forth between them. But I'll tell you what his criticism was. So he sends me this email. He's been trash talking me more so, but people should know when you start a trash talk fight with me, it won't end. It just won't. So sorry, but this person says the real news had an interesting piece on Nicaragua. I'll just state again that I understand that Razor, that's me, Razor Ray McCoy, because that's my nickname it's my pen name on, what's it called? On the Hard News Network, wants so bad for me to play his dumb my side versus your side game with Nicaragua. That's not my perspective. I try to gather information and understand the situation better. I fundamentally think differently. It seems to me that Razor and many like him have an ideology. I have an ideology. I have an ideology. You watch this clip and you know about this organization that he's using as a source. And you tell me who has an ideology. Okay? And then he says, and seek out info which supports that ideology. You wind up with these absurd ideas that there are bad guys, so the other side is good guys by default, etc. That is seldom reality. Well, I regret to inform this gentleman that he is, so this is me. I regret to inform this gentleman that he has actually gathered information from the most partisan side possible. So we'll play the introduction to the video, and then I'll start with my analysis.
It's the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert, coming to you from Quito, Ecuador. The political crisis in Nicaragua continues unabated. On Monday, the Episcopal Conference of Nicaragua, the mediator for the dialogue between the government and the opposition, decided to call off all further negotiations. The stated reason was that the government had not fulfilled previously reached commitments to invite international observers to help investigate the large number of deaths that took place in Nicaragua since the protest began in late April. Up to 170 people have been killed and over 2,000 injured in protests so far. Victims include opposition protesters, government supporters, and security forces. Exactly who has been responsible for these deaths and injuries is mired in controversy, with each side accusing the other of carrying most of the blame. The protest began when students and the country's business federation, COSEP, launched a movement against the government's efforts to reform Nicaragua's pension system.
So we're getting into this now. I want to tell you who this person is. This is the narrator, Gregory Wilpert. And aside from working on, he's the narrator and he's the host. And aside from working on the Real News Network, he is also the creator of VenezuelaAnalysis.com. And I have one of their articles here. And VenezuelaAnalysis.com is basically, if you read their articles, it is simply a pro-Venezuelan government website. They just share pro-Venezuela government news. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Now, I'm not saying you can't have a website that does. I'm not saying that they're not entitled to put forward information that fits their point of view. But you can't call this objective reporting on Venezuela. He lost me the moment he pronounced Nicaragua. It's Nicaragua. What do you want? You've probably been there, Larry. You in the Navy, you imperialist asshole, you imperialist Maoist. Larry Gerke hates being called a Maoist, but everybody called Larry a Maoist in the chat. Anyway, so this is one of their articles. It says one enemy, one fight for democracy. So I'll go through, and it's just an opinion piece, and that's what they write. It's opinion pieces. The organization also shares content. So this website is an explicitly pro-government media outlet and even lists a section of solidarity groups. So let's take a look at that one. So solidarity groups, antiwar.com, hands off Venezuela, Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, the Venezuela We Are With You Coalition, the Hugo Chavez People's Defense Front. I didn't even look through all these before. The Latin American and Caribbean Solidarity Network, the Australia Venezuela Solidarity Network, and the Green Left Weekly. So this is not objective reporting, guys. It's not. Our cat Sassy is a meowist. Yeah, thanks for the puns. Yeah, I'm going to use that tomorrow. I have a friend at my synagogue. Yes, I believe in religion, guys. So why don't you go? All of you atheists out there, you can eat me. So I know somebody there who hates puns, so I'm gonna use it tomorrow. Yeah, meowist. So the organization also shares content freely from Mint Press News, which is a pro-Iranian press outlet from Minnesota. Now, again, I'm not using this to say that you can't. You can't. I gotta minimize this chat. I'm not saying that you can't use these people to gather information, read it, or everything. But if you're relying on it as a source for anything, you're out of your fucking mind. It's not a. First of all, I've analyzed stuff from some of these outlets before, and they leave out basic facts, and they're basically opinion outlets. They're not news outlets at all. And for those of you that say, well, why do you use Fox News and why do you use Breitbart? You can look through any video I have, look through almost any blog that I have. I hardly ever use ever any of those sources. In fact, I don't think I've ever used Breitbart for any production or video production or any blog that I've done. I almost instinctively avoid it, not because I don't like Breitbart. Sometimes I go there and I find news that I find interesting, but because you do want to have news sources that people will be able to process and say, well, this is something that at least shows hard data. It at least shows, a basic telling of the facts without a heavy dose of opinion. And that's what I try to do. I hope that I succeed because, it's not easy. So one of these people that he features is not even he features content from a blogger called Tortilla con Sal, which means salt tortilla, and it says and the title is Venezuela and Nicaragua: One Enemy, One Fight for Democracy. When you look up who Tortilla con Sal is from Telesur's website, this is their description, okay? And I have the quote in my blog, and it's right here. It says, Tortilla con Sal is an anti-imperialist collective based in Nicaragua producing information in various media on national, regional, and international affairs. In Nicaragua, we work closely with grassroots community organizations and cooperatives. We strongly support the policies of sovereign international development and regional integration based on peace and solidarity promoted by the member countries of ALBA. So who is ALBA? Okay, who are they? ALBA is the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of our America, the regional bloc of states headed by Venezuela in Caracas that happens to include all of the members of the governing countries of Telesur. So this is the independent media that Wilpert features on his so-called news website. This is the type of content that the Real News Network features in order to comment on Venezuela and Nicaragua related stories. And what about Wilpert himself? So he happens to be married to Carol Delgado Aria, who is the Venezuelan ambassador to Ecuador since 2014. And I have, this is an official link to the Ecuadorian government site. And she happens to be the Venezuelan ambassador to Ecuador. So this person who's calling me biased, who's saying that I'm the liar, saying that I am the person who's buying into the imperialist garbage. He is using a source who's married to the ambassador of Venezuela, the country that I criticize. Do you do any basic investigation? I'd like to ask him. By the way, I shared with him. I shared with him the. Did I share it with him? I'm going to share this with him. He knows where he's been looking at my videos too. I know he's been commenting on it. While he's yeah, I'm not going to say any more because I'm not going to personally attack him yet. That will come later, later next week. But this guy, he knows where to find me, and he's been messaging me too. And the fact of the matter is that he's basically said, oh, this is just an interesting perspective. Yeah, it's the interesting perspective of a person who's personally married to an official of the government that I'm criticizing, that you're claiming that I'm using imperialist propaganda for. Well, you're using propaganda for the side that you're talking about. So which one are you? I mean, show me any proof of any propaganda that I've used. The only thing that he can show is that I've cited the Carter Center, which happens to also echo the same sentiment that the Organization of American States says. Well, so what? So do you think the Carter Center bases all of their information on the OAS? She also used to be Venezuela's consul general in New York, according to the Venezuela embassy website profile. Okay, it says right here. Carol Delgado Aria is the ambassador of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela in the Republic of Ecuador since November 2014. Previously, since 2008, she was deployed as the consul general of Venezuela in New York, where she was the founder and coordinator of the Latin American Coalition of Consul Generals. She had her bachelor degree at the Central University of Venezuela. I don't know what the degree is. It might have been literature. She got her master in sciences for the third sector in the Milan School of International Relations. Wow. Yeah, international relations management and public policy. And she, oh, okay. So and this belongs to the New School for Social Research in New York. Okay, and she has fulfilled her studies in international relations and gender studies and rights. You're dealing with a real serious person there, aren't you? That's the person he's married to. Gender studies, baby. real credibility here. She also managed the international magazine of PDVSA, the oil company that's falling apart in Venezuela, Siembra Petrolera. She was the director of international relations of the National Council of the Rights of the of Children, of male children, female children, and adolescents, and is a founding member of the Venezuelan Foundation for Global Justice. She has promoted the rights of the infant, the gender equality, and also organizing popular power in Venezuela. She also has been a member of the Socialist League and is a militant of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the PSUV, that's the governing party of Venezuela. So he's married to a woman who is a member of the ruling party of Venezuela, the Chavez and Maduro's party, the PSUV, who is also their ambassador to Ecuador since 2014. Ecuador being one of the main allies of Venezuela until very recently, when their new president came in and changed course. And my critic is taking this person to be a useful perspective. it's a useful perspective for my side, because you're going to see soon that the interview actually validates some of my points. It doesn't validate any of his points. And by the way, the New School is one of the most expensive colleges in New York City. So those of you thinking, oh, these are real, stand up people for the proletariat, you know what the fuck you're talking about? These are the upper crust. She was getting these degrees before Chavez. This means she she had to have had some sort of money. Isn't Nicaragua where Rigoberto Menchú comes from? I thought she came from Peru. Also, you left the accent out, so everyone should caress that like button. Then, when you've gained its trust, smash it. Okay. Arjun, by the way, I didn't say hi to Arjun, and I did mention Larry, Pinochet, Sislowski, Reven Starkiller, I already mentioned, Metadata Man. All right, share this stream. Share this stream, because there are not a lot of people talking about Nicaragua. The people that do, I give them credit, but there are not a lot of people. So who are these guests that they're going to have? Well, let's let's let him introduce them.
Then, groups and issues involved have broadened. Demonstrators now demand the immediate resignation of President Daniel Ortega. Joining me to help make sense of what is happening in Nicaragua are Trevor Evans and Camilo Mejia. Trevor joins us from Berlin, Germany, where he teaches at the Institute for International Political Economy, the Berlin School of Economics and Law. He has worked in Nicaragua in the 1980s and 1990s for a total of 8 years. Also, recently, he wrote an in-depth article for socialistproject.ca titled The Family Party State Nexus in Nicaragua. Camilo Mejia joins us from...
We have this, and it has a very interesting passage I'm going to read to you soon. But, let's keep going.
From Florida, Miami, Florida. Originally, he's from Nicaragua, but joined the US military in 1995. He went on to become a conscientious objector when he was deployed in the Iraq War in 2003, and then he became an Amnesty International prisoner of conscience. He recently wrote an open letter to Amnesty International objecting to their latest report on Nicaragua. Thanks for joining us today, Camilo and Trevor.
Thank you.
So let's go into who his guests are. So the first person is Trevor Evans, the British man, and he's from the Regional Center for Economic and Social Research, or CREACE. It reads like cries in English, but it's CREACE, which was it was formerly located in Managua, Nicaragua. Now, I do want to say that I did a little research on that organization. They are pretty hard left, but I wouldn't say that they're so hard. Well, I would probably say that their academic stuff is not as partisan as you would think. And the fact of the matter is that this organization it was started in Nicaragua. But by the way, that guy isn't German. He just works in Germany. So sorry if anybody's confused, but he's a British person. Trevor Evans is not a German name. So that organization it started in Nicaragua, but it's completely changed. And to be honest with you, I've done a rundown of everything that they have and all the people that they have on their staff. It's for all intents and purposes, it's an Argentinian organization now. They've moved. They talk a lot about Nicaragua, and yet not a single person on their main staff is from there. And they have the majority of the people there are from Argentina, and they have a couple people from Brazil and Mexico. Okay, so this is an organization they talk about, and no disrespect to Trevor Evans. I don't want people to misunderstand me, but there's a lot of leftists who become academics and they move to these countries, or they start to analyze these countries, and they talk about how there needs to be a way to help the workers and help the poor and everything. Well, you're a foreign academic who moves to this country to perform a white collar job, sometimes at the expense of the people, as it was in the 80s when he lived there under the Sandinistas. They're funding your budget, right? And then you know, you want to talk about solidarity with workers. That's not solidarity with workers. You're actually using the labor of somebody else in order to do something that's a white collar job, basically. So, you know, that's the criticism I have for the intellectual left, because they talk about manual laborers and you know, farmers and industrial workers. They hold them up to be these this holier class of people, the people that need to be redeemed, but they don't choose to do it. And I've worked in a few blue collar jobs in my life. I'd have to say a couple of the ones I've had have been pretty, you know, they're desk jobs, but other ones not so much. And you know, either you believe in solidarity with the workers and you go through with it, or you're full of shit and you're just using it as a cover to promote your moral sophistry that has nothing to do with that. You know, the best way to help out the workers and laborers is to open a business and employ some of them in them. Okay, now, by the way, you can find his CV in German, because I know you guys love German, over here. Okay, so if anybody's, and you know, I'm not going to trash this guy. I think, by the way, in this video he says a number of very, very good things, and I never say that they're real news, as much as I despise them. I never say that you shouldn't watch them, because they have made a number of news reports, especially about Baltimore, that are very interesting and illustrative of what the situation in our country is. And you know, for that, you know, I'll give them credit where they deserve it. In this case, I think, you know, you're going to see, I give them kind of, you know, a mixed criticism. So the other person on the left is Camilo Mejia, and he's a well-known conscientious objector from the Iraq War. You know, a lot of people in my audience objected to the Iraq War. I think that we'd all agree that, you know, a conscientious objector, there's probably a few good reasons why somebody would object to the war in Iraq. And he's the son of Carlos Mejia Godoy, a former Sandinista songwriter and now an opposition politician. According to the Miami New Times, Mejia became estranged from his father when his parents separated at 5 months old, and his mother took him and his brother to New York City. She later became a mistress to Camilo Ortega, the brother of Daniel Ortega, the current president of Nicaragua, who was killed during the Sandinista revolution. His father served in the National Assembly under the Sandinistas, and the family lived in relative affluence to the rest of the country until 1991, when Ortega was defeated in an election by Violeta Chamorro, and the revolution ended. They then moved to Miami, where Mejia would eventually join the military in 1995. So this is like a college of some of these people. They lived off of you know, they were high-end Nicaraguans under Ortega during the 80s, when he was originally in power. He's almost, you could think of the adopted nephew of Daniel Ortega, and plus his father was an official under Ortega, and he was in their assembly, their Congress. And then when the revolution's over, you know, he moved away. His mother moved away. Okay, so once the gravy train's over, they just leave. Okay, firing up the helicopters. I'm glad I have such a supporting audience. So then he leaves and he joins the American military. So this is how principled the person is. He comes from a Sandinista family, and then he joins the U.S. military that the Sandinistas have been claiming, you know, has exploited Nicaragua for all these years. And you know what? I would agree that the United States history in Nicaragua was not a good history. It was actually, you know, we screwed them over several times. Probably over the course of 50 years, we screwed them over using, you know, just propping up their banana republic government under Somoza, which we'll get to soon. In 2004, in the wake of a tour of duty in Iraq, Mejia applied for conscientious objector status was declined and eventually court-martialed for deserting. He now lives in Miami and regularly shares his support for the FSLN. So I think this one I might have to, let me see here. Hold on. So, I fucking hate Facebook videos. Yeah, I'm gonna have to. So you can click that link on the blog and you can see he basically he ends up supporting the Sandinistas of present day, and he's always like sharing these videos nowadays. Now that link is to a Facebook post, okay, and this was a Facebook post that he shared of a Sandinista demonstration during this year's unrest. So you're talking about a supporter of the Sandinistas. He is a Sandinista, and in contrast to Camilo Mejia, which is this guy, okay. His father Carlos is now protesting against the Sandinistas, including this video of him outside El Chipote for the release of the son-in-law of his singing partner Milciades Pavon. So this is a songwriter. He's one of the most famous songwriters in Venezuela, and this is his demonstration.
Señorita, buenas tardes.
So this is not at the U.S. border with the kids. This is somebody going to the detention center El Chipote in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, sorry, and asking for about the welfare of a protester detained without trial.
Por lo menos contésteme el buenas tardes como ciudadana.
He says, good afternoon. At least greet me with the good afternoon as a citizen of Nicaragua.
Señorita, estoy hablando con usted. Si está ocupada, yo la espero.
He says, Miss, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you. If you're busy, I'll wait.
¿Me puede atender, por favor? Soy un ser humano que viene aquí no vengo a crear un problema. Caballero.
He says, I'm a person too. You have to understand. I'm not trying to make any problems, gentlemen.
No merezco que se me reciba, ni siquiera. No quiero que me abran la puerta, simplemente que me den una información que yo necesito.
He says, I'm just trying to get the information that I need.
Quiero saber si lo tienen vivo. Quiero saber si él existe.
I want to find out if he's alive. I want to find out if he exists.
Tengo derecho como ciudadano de saber que mi hermano nicaragüense está aquí.
I have the right as a citizen, as a Nicaraguan citizen, to know that my friend is here.
No me pueden negar ese derecho. Tanto han descendido ustedes.
You can't deny me this right, as burned out as you people are.
Pobres muchachos y muchachas, no tienen culpa ustedes. Tienen temor de perder el salario.
He says, poor brothers and sisters, you're not to blame. You just fear losing your salaries.
Lo comprendo. Soy cristiano y lo comprendo.
I understand that. I'm a Christian. I understand that well.
Ahí tienen, hermanos. Ahí tienen la realidad de nuestro pueblo. Nos hemos deshumanizado de tal manera. Me siento inerme en este país. ¿De qué me sirve ser a mí una persona conocida? Tengo el mismo nivel de ustedes.
He goes and says, this is a situation in our country. People are being dehumanized. I'm at the same level as you are. Second. Hold on. Getting these fucking messages. It's like, come on. All right. Sorry about that. It's impossible to know when you're receiving messages during a live stream. It's impossible to know if they're even directed at you. Fucking shit. So yeah, that's enough of that. You can find that on the blog. I'm just not going to go through it. Usually I'll play something through to the end, but we're already through 45 minutes and we haven't even, I think, how much of the video are we through? 2 minutes. So, and there's 9 to go. So it's lucky I only did the first part so far today. The second part I listened to today was also, a lot of bullshit, but the Trevor Evans guy actually says some smart things. Smart things for a socialist. So that's his father. His father is a major songwriter in Venezuela or in Nicaragua. Sorry, I keep saying Venezuela and Nicaragua interchangeably. We're talking about Nicaragua today. And he was a symbol of the Sandinista revolution of 1979. He served under the Sandinistas during the 1980s, and now he's part of the Sandinista reform movement, the MSR, which is one of the opposition parties to the FSLN, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, which is the governing party of Daniel Ortega. So let's keep going. We're going to play some of this. Well, we're going to play the whole clip through.
So Camilo, let's start with you and the most recent developments in Nicaragua. As I mentioned in the intro, you wrote a long letter to Amnesty International objecting to how they covered or reported on what's going on. The report's title already is quite telling. It says, "Shoot to Kill, Nicaragua's Strategy to Repress Protests." This is also generally how international media have depicted the conflict so far. So from what you know what's happening, what is wrong with this depiction?
Beginning with the larger context, I think that the information has been manipulated and has left out the entire geopolitical frame within which the conflict is happening. For starters, the reforms proposed by the government were not government reforms, but they were counter reforms to impositions basically made by the International Monetary Fund alongside the COSEP, this powerful business group that sought to cut out 53,000 Nicaraguans from their retirement benefits. These 53,000 Nicaraguans are people who fought on both sides of the aisle during the Contra Wars back in the 80s, and the families of people who were killed. These are people who were not able to contribute enough to the system because the economy was shattered. And this were the original reform in order to cover the deficit of the Social Security Institute, sought to throw 53,000 of the poorest citizens of Nicaragua under the bus. So the government responded with a counter reform that didn't cut anybody out, and that merely sought to take a 5% cut from retirement checks and to remove a ceiling protecting Nicaragua's highest salaries from higher taxation, as well as increased contributions by both employees and employers. All of that was left out of the equation when they organized the marches, which were organized by this powerful business group. And I think this is really important to say because it provides a larger context. These IMF reforms are tied to the NICA Act, which is being proposed by some of the more right-wing Republican legislators in the United States, including Ted Cruz, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and Marco Rubio. So U.S. involvement in this whole picture has been completely left out of the analysis, and I think that's a big problem. Amnesty opened its report pretty much by saying that the government had cut retirement checks, leaving everything else out.
So we get to now. I let it play for a while because what he's talking about is a larger context, and he says, "Well, let me play a few more seconds."
I think it's interesting also to say that the people who are behind this coup, because it cannot be called otherwise, are civil society organizations that are being financed by organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy, the National Democratic Institute, USAID, and they have been the ones behind training a lot of the young people who represent the face of this movement, and who are working alongside political parties that don't have a popular base in Nicaragua, that don't have any credibility, that are
So he says a lot there, and some of it, the National Endowment for Democracy, you can say, okay, his claim is that they're destabilizing the country. The United States is funding these groups. I'm not for funding any opposition groups overseas, or in this case, just in a country near our borders. Nicaragua is, we're separated from Nicaragua by Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. So it's three borders away. So in any case, what he fails to talk about is really that Nicaragua, fuck the whole thing with imperialism, okay? You want to talk about a country, you can't just blame everything on what's happening with respect to what's going on with his interaction with other countries, the U.S., even this National Endowment for Democracy thing, what does that excuse? The mismanagement and failure of the Nicaraguan government. Do you think people are really going to riot just because you're giving them money? Well, in some cases that does happen. I would say in this case that's not the reason. Okay, so yes, the National Endowment for Democracy and some of these other groups, the USAID. I would say that those are issues that if Nicaragua wanted to deal with that, they could pass a law saying that you need to be licensed to practice as an NGO in Nicaragua. There's no reason they couldn't do that. The reason that they wouldn't do that is because a number of these organizations, whether it's the USAID, or whether it's the Mormon Church, or whether it's one of these Pentecostal churches, they provide a lot of the aid to rural Venezuelans, or I keep saying that, rural Nicaraguans. They go to rural areas of Nicaragua, and they do, they provide infrastructure, these church groups. And I'm not a Mormon, and I'm not a Pentecostal. You probably all know that. But they perform some of these services as obviously their goal of recruiting people for their mission. And if the Nicaraguan government were to reject those groups or kick them out, whether it is the USAID or whether it is the Mormon Church, I think that you would also create some manner of rebellion. And I would say that it's understandable that he could do that if he was to try to preserve his relationship with the Catholic Church as he used to. I think at this point it's kind of jumped the shark with them. So what's the big elephant in the room that he doesn't mention at all? Let's not even talk about Venezuela. Okay, we could talk, that'll be in the next segment that we do, probably either tomorrow night or Sunday. Let's talk about China. In 2013, the nation's Hong Kong Nicaragua Development Group agreed with the newly re-elected Ortega government to build a new canal between Nicaragua's Pacific and Caribbean coasts that would dwarf and rival the Panama Canal. This proposal would have created, according to the government, 250,000 jobs, although in reality half of them will be taken by Chinese construction workers. They do this all over the world. Again, when I criticize China, it's not because I want a war with China. I'm just saying that this is how they do it, and it doesn't benefit the countries where they do it. By 2016, there were already protests by farmers threatened with the seizure of their lands by the Ortega government. And, I have this, it's from Noticias. I think this is from Costa Rica. Okay. So it says the anti-riot police deployed tear gas canisters and lead and rubber bullets against the demonstrators. That led to several people being shocked and 7 wounded. Okay, so at least 13 wounded in a protest against the Interoceanic Canal in Nicaragua. So it says at least 13 people were injured in a confrontation between police and peasants who were marching towards the Nicaraguan capital to protest against the Interoceanic Canal project, according to several sources this Wednesday. This is from 2016. The subdirector of the police, Francisco Diaz, accused in a press release the demonstrators of being a vandalistic group. This Tuesday agitated the security agents in the southern districts of La Sardina and San Miguelito, where 6 police officers were wounded, without mentioning the gravity of the wounds. The lawyer for the movement against the canal, Monica Lopez, refuted this version of the story and assured that this was an example of police brutality yesterday, Tuesday. We have 7 wounded. One of them is on the verge of death. Okay, so there is an issue here with the Organization of American States. You know, they do get involved in this, but what do you want? So these incidents are these incidents are occurring at the moment that a mission of the Organization of American States is situated in Nicaragua, in advance of a visit that is occurring on Thursday of its Secretary General, the Uruguayan Luis Almagro. Okay, so yes, there is an issue here where the Organization of American States has come and monitored what's going on there, but realize what the context of that is. The internet, okay, so we have a country, Nicaragua, where these this government has concentrated power in its own hands and has promoted a canal project that is displacing peasants and farm workers. Okay, and basically, to give you an idea of of what's on tap with that canal, let me see here. I think there was a map on this one. So yeah, here we go. You're basically digging through land on this path. Okay, that's what they were going to do. This has been canceled since then. So you're having to go through all of these lands and this is all the way to Bluefields, Nicaragua, which is on the Caribbean coast. By the way, over there, it's called Bluefields. A lot of people living there are descendants of English-speaking Caribbean slaves. Let's see how many people we got right now. Where's my window? So, one of the issues that has come up is that, yes, the Nicaraguan government is run by a leftist Sandinista, Daniel Ortega, but why is he contracting with China to build a canal all the way from one end of Nicaragua to the other, through, I think there's Lake Maracaibo? Or that's Lake Nicaragua. I don't remember where Lake Maracaibo is. I think that one might be in Venezuela. So they're trying to build this canal. There were protests building up. Then in February 2018, following a bettering of ties between Panama and China, the funding of the Nicaragua Canal Project and HKND Chairman Wang Jing suddenly ran out of funds, and the project has appeared to have been canceled. This is after Ortega had promised to have the canal operational by 2020. To claim that the Nicaragua protests are exclusively due to a botched Social Security and income tax reform is to whitewash the past 5 years of Ortega's rule, including his most famous failure, the Nicaraguan canal. In fact, there are sources now claiming that Wang never intended to construct the canal and that he deceived Ortega's government by claiming that he was backed by the Chinese government. Now understand that they did begin construction of the canal, and then this means they displaced farmers. They basically this is akin to something that Arjun was talking about with West Bengal, where Tata Motors they were given through eminent domain land that farm workers had or actually small landholding peasants had, and then the company pulled out. So basically, you displace these peasants and then give it to a company, and then you don't give it back. Uh, very nice. Very proletarian. And that was a communist party, too, over there in West Bengal that did it. So imposing a socialist government does not actually mean that you benefit the society. Eventually, they need to find sources for funding, too. And when that comes up, the interests of the people become expendable. So let's keep watching the video. Let's see. So
it is necessary for them to
imposing
create
a socialist government does not actually mean that you benefit the society. Eventually, they need to find sources. So, sorry about that.
Because the constitutional reforms will not lead to an overtaking of power by these right-wing parties and these other groups that are behind much of the violence in the country. I think it's really important also to look at the history between Nicaragua and the United States. Sandinismo in particular, which started with the fight of General Sandino back in the late 20s and 30s, first expelled the Marines from the country and then led to a movement that overthrew a 40-year dictatorship supported by the United States. The Sandinistas then called for elections not even 6 years after winning power through armed struggle, and then later lost the election in the 1990 election, and then were able to come back from that loss through a series of deals that they made with the church and with the business sector, and were able to go back into power and bring back a lot of the benefits that had been cut out by neoliberal governments of the past 15 years prior to the Sandinista government. So this larger economic analysis, I think it's completely missing from the picture. And I think it's really important to recognize who are the people who are behind this narrative and who are the people who are creating this idea that the government suddenly turned genocidal.
Okay, Camilo.
So I want to point something out. He says something that is a transparent lie. He says, I think it's really important also to look at the history of Nicaragua and the United States. Now, I'll tell you what, I did not take anything, what you're seeing in italics in my article, if you pull it up. And again, I'll put the link in the chat, and please like it on Google Plus, I guess, or share it wherever you can, Twitter, whatever. So I took this directly from the transcript of this interview on The Real News. So I'm not taking anything he's saying out of context. I'm literally dissecting everything paragraph by paragraph. It says, I think it's really important also to look at the history of Nicaragua and the United States. Sandinismo in particular, which started with the fight of General Sandino back in the late 20s and 30s, first expelled the Marines from the country and then led to a movement that overthrew a 40-year dictatorship supported by the United States. The Sandinistas then called for elections not even 6 years after winning power through armed struggle. So he's saying, it's very generous that they call for free elections 6 years after winning power. That's not, I mean, how generous is that? That's, democratic elections. You don't get a 6-year head start before, as a military regime in order to run free elections. I think, by the way, to give them credit, from what I understand, they were free elections. So I'm not saying that everything that they did was wrong and that it was correct for us to fund the Contras or anything. Although remember, it was the Cold War. and then later lost the election and the 1990 election. And then they were able to come back from a loss through a series of deals that they made with the church and the business sector, and were able to go back into power and bring back a lot of the benefits that have been cut out by neoliberal governments of the past 15 years prior to the Sandinista government. So this is a point that should be known. Okay, you can look it up anywhere. Augusto Sandino he never expelled the Marines. Okay, they were not. The fact is that in the 20s, after the U.S. Sent the Marines in to deal with instability in Nicaragua following a military coup, which was a bad idea. So Sandino began a rebellion, and the Marines simply never caught him. But in every engagement, he lost. His side lost. Okay, so you can look at him as a heroic figure, but you can't say that he expelled the Marines, because they were simply withdrawn after, the Hoover administration. I think it might have even been the Coolidge administration sent the Marines there in 1926, and then they were there under President Hoover. And then in 1932, they declared that, as a result of the Depression, they were going to withdraw the Marines from Nicaragua. So it had nothing to do with Sandino wearing them down or anything. He simply survived their time as the an occupying force in Nicaragua. He was then killed in 1934 by the National Guard under Anastasio Somoza Garcia, and his movement was extinguished. The Sandinista National Liberation Front was only founded in 1961 by Carlos Fonseca. So they used his name to form a totally new movement, which was based on Marxism. The original Sandino was not really a Marxist. He was more of like some of the things Sandino advocated for, you could say, are just patriotic. He was arguing for the sovereignty of Nicaragua. Just like a lot of, and he was probably right to do that. By the way, I support the independence of Puerto Rico. I don't think we should keep Puerto Rico, both for selfish reasons and for other reasons. I think we should give Puerto Rico its independence and say, hasta luego, bro. So this is not to say that it was a good, moral, or correct thing that Sandino was killed by a U.S.-backed regime. But it's a factual correction of a clear error that Mejia makes that he should probably know is wrong. By the way, on this blog, it's very difficult to format shit. So I'm sorry if it came out a bit fucked up. You'll notice that there's certain words that are, they're cut off or whatever. Pinochet says, did he address the issue of the state running out of money and punishing the universities for their accounting problems? The real reason? Well, I mean, I mentioned the biggest issue that's been happening in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, the one that's really fucked people over, and this is beyond. I mean, this is 5 years before 2018. The canal he didn't even mention. They don't mention the canal at all, and not in the second part either. By the way, nobody mentions the canal. The canal is the big elephant in the room. It's the canal through your living room, basically. The Chinese canal was one of the first things that caused demonstrations against against Ortega. So then we get into some of the other stuff. So they pass the baton to somebody else.
Actually, we want to get into many of those issues that you raised. But let me also turn to Trevor for a minute. In addition to, of course, there's this whole issue, which we still need to get into a little bit, about the unresolved issue about the responsibilities for the violence. But I also want to get into this question about the motivations behind the protests. And you, Camilo, have already talked about that to some extent. But I also want to get your input, Trevor, on what you think is behind this. I mean, as Camilo mentioned, originally the IMF and the Business Federation wanted the government to cut the pension benefits much more sharply. And also we have to take into account that Nicaragua has been one of the fastest growing economies in the recent years, between 2010 and 2017, growing by 5% per year. So
he says something here that is, it's technically true, but you have to put it into perspective. So it's very simplistic. In fact, under Ortega, Nicaragua's GDP growth has fluctuated dramatically. So he can take an average. And he can say, oh, it's an average of 5% a year. But in fact, until 2012, Nicaragua had over 6.5% growth, and by 2017, it had sunk to less than 5%. However, if you if you average out the growth rates over 8 years, you get 5% annual growth. And again, this is, I think it was actually 5.15%, so it's above. If you take the average growth over the past 8 years that we're talking about, 2010 through 2017, it's about 5%. And again, this is ignoring the unrest caused by the Nicaraguan canal. And that's very important. The fact that they leave out the Nicaraguan canal, which is the largest public works project initiated under Ortega, which, by the way, has been canceled now. So it's basically money in the toilet. And it's not going, the money's not going to be recovered, because you invest that money with the understanding that it's going to yield some sort of benefit in the future. Well, if the canal is never built, then you threw the money in the toilet. You basically wasted several years of labor, several years of investment, several years of also of the material, and it's basically gone down the drain. But yeah, if you look at this map, let me see here. You can see that Nicaragua has, I believe they do have either the largest or now the second largest growth in what's it called, in Central America. And I'm only using Central America because those are the countries with roughly, a similar type of economy, similar type of climate. You want to compare it to the rest of Latin America. Remember, if in order for let's say a country, a major industrial power of Latin America, let's say Argentina, to grow, it takes a lot more for them to get it growing. It's basically like making an obese person be able to run faster, okay? Because they're larger. The economy is larger, okay? So, so essentially, this is a misleading statistic, because yes, the growth is an average of 5%, but the growth has been trailing off, and it will continue to trail off, and I'll explain why later.
So, taking into account this relatively positive economic situation and the fact that Ortega won the last presidential election with 72% of the vote, what do you think, Trevor, is motivating these protests, and how would you respond to some of the things that Camilo is saying?
Yeah, I was really surprised by these protests. I left Nicaragua at the very end of March, and they broke out 2 weeks later. What one should say is that Ortega was re-elected in 2007 because the conservatives and the liberals were split and couldn't agree on a candidate. And then he won again in 2011, although the constitution did not allow consecutive presidencies. He then changed the constitution and stood.
Essentially, he changed the constitution and stood yet again in 2016 with his wife as vice president. So this is a very irregular system that really doesn't accord with the original provisions of the constitution. So this is where I agree. Typically, the left proclaims publicly that they reject the idea of nepotism, where family members get granted power. Yet here we see Ortega nominating his own wife to be vice president. We've also seen this happen with Maria Gabriela Chavez, the daughter of Hugo Chavez and the richest woman in Venezuela, who became the Venezuelan ambassador to the UN following his death. Until then, she had been living in the Miraflores in the presidential palace. So realize that, Ortega nominates his wife to be vice president. This is something I have to repeat this, but one of the biggest criticisms I have for Trump is that he has Kushner and Ivanka Trump running around the world for him. It's an embarrassment to the country. It shows the weakness of the weakness of our system. That we have. It was the same thing that Kennedy did when he nominated Bobby Kennedy to be Attorney General. When people do that, it's a sign that they want somebody that they can trust to fulfill their interests in that department. And it's wrong. It's wrong when Donald Trump does it. It's wrong when JFK did it. It's also wrong for you to have your relatives. First of all, Maria Chavez is the richest woman in Venezuela. It's been confirmed that she's the, let's open this article. This is from the Daily Mail, Second. Having some slowdown issues here. So, being the ex-president's daughter pays off. Hugo Chavez's ambassador daughter is Venezuela's richest woman. Diario Las Americas claims that Maria Gabriela Chavez has $4.2 billion in assets held in American and Andorran banks. So, yeah, it's some eye candy at the bottom. You got some ass models. The figure would make, so Chavez is wealthier than media mogul Gustavo Cisneros, whom Forbes named the wealthiest Venezuelan earlier this year with $6.3 billion in assets. Last year, reporter Maria Elvira Salazar displayed what appeared to be a receipt showing millions in a bank account belonging to Gabriela Chavez withdrawn in the United States. The receipt displays the name Frob's Federal Bank, a fictitious bank used in a meme of fake ATM receipts. So that was one attempt that was debunked. Others close to Chavez managed to build up greater personal wealth that was kept outside the petrostate. Alejandro Andrade, who served as Venezuela's Treasury Minister from 2007 to 2010 and was reportedly a close associate of Chavez, was discovered to have $11.2 billion in his name sitting in HSBC accounts in Switzerland, according to documents leaked by whistleblower Hervé Falciani. So you have this woman. She's living on the public dime from Venezuela. Jeffrey Ellen Johnson, you're yawning. I mean, you just joined. I mean, who cares? Do you think Larry's still gone? We could talk shit about him until he comes back. Yeah, go ahead. My neighbor just arrived home. So this is what happens in these so-called proletarian paradises. You have these people that they pretend that they're all for the people. In reality, they're concentrating assets and power in their own hands. Okay, so I don't want to hear anything about people saying, well, they're benefiting the people, they're doing it all in order to help the poor and the forgotten people of Venezuela. Well, then why appoint your daughter the ambassador to the UN, as Venezuela has done? Okay, why appoint your wife the vice president of Nicaragua, as Ortega has done? It doesn't make any sense. So let's keep watching.
Yet again in 2016 with his wife as vice president. So this is a very irregular system that really doesn't accord with the original provisions of the Constitution. Since he came back to office in 2007, the economy, as you say, has grown. It was initially hit by the world crisis, 2008, 2009, but since 2010, it has grown, and it's one of the fastest growing economies in Latin America. But if you look at what's happened to living standards, it's difficult to get reliable figures. But if you look at the figures for workers who are in the pension scheme, their wages expressed in dollars have been rising at about 1% a year since 2010. But the economy's been growing at 5%. So some of the difference will have gone to a big commercial sector. But above all, it's the rich. It's the bourgeoisie, the landed class who have since invested in agriculture, industry, and banking, who have done very, very well out of this. And
so I'll pause it there at 9 minutes. So Evan says, since he came back into office in 2007 and the economy, as you say, has grown, it was initially hit by the world crisis of 2008 through 2009. But since 2010, it has grown, and it's one of the fastest growing economies in Latin America. But if you look at what's happened to living standards, it's difficult to get reliable figures. But if you look at the figures for workers who are in the pension scheme, their wages expressed in dollars have been rising at about 1% a year since 2010. The economy's been growing at 5%, so some of the difference will have gone to a big commercial sector. So, I say once again, one of the panelists brings up the issue of Nicaragua's supposedly burgeoning economic growth and comparing it favorably with the rest of Latin America. The fact of the matter is, however, they have compared with the rest of Central America. It is rather unimpressive, and in fact is trailing behind Panama, as the world graph below shows. However, Nicaragua's annual growth was rising up until Ortega came into power, dipped along with the rest of the world during the Great Recession, and then spiked again under his rule during until 2012. So that would be this graphic over here. Let me see. Can I get a bigger image? Yeah. So you can see here. Actually, this is a different issue. So Nicaragua also dramatically trailed the rest of Central America in per capita GDP during those 6 years. The average Nicaraguan earns less than a sixth of what average Panamanian does in 1 year. That's $2,151 versus $13,000. So you're earning less than 1/6. So let me see here. Okay, so this is the total GDP, and Guatemala is not a rich country, but it's approaching $70 billion annually. Okay, so that's a pretty, it's a moderately sized economy. After that, then would be Costa Rica, which I think has less people there. And then Panama, and then El Salvador, and then Honduras, and then Nicaragua is at the bottom. So in general, yes, you could say that Nicaragua is growing, but it's also still the smallest economy in Latin America. It's the poorest economy in Latin America. I also have a graph that's for the per capita GDP. You can go right here, and I have, you can use any of these links. And Nicaragua is way, way, way below Panama. So, you go to Honduras, which is also a pretty poor country. I know some people from Honduras, and they're great people. And believe me, I don't have any opposition to people. I don't think people who come here should be viewed as, the evil people that everybody portrays them to be. Not all of them. A lot of them are actually pretty nice people. And a lot of them are, they're escaping basically an economy that is not really set up to afford people with the opportunity to get anywhere in life. That doesn't excuse them from coming over the border illegally, and they would. I mean, it's known. You don't have to be you don't have to be rich to know that getting into a country illegally is against the law. It's known to anybody who with the most basic idea of how countries work, that you can't cross a border and expect to be welcomed with open arms just because you need more money than you would make where you come from. And to, Honduras is a country also ruled by a brutal dictator who's a right-winger. Okay, I forgot his name, but but it's a fact. Last year, I think that there was a major riot in Honduras. Let's look it up. So in that one, there were 38 deaths. And this was something that was covered extensively by Telesur TV. 38 deaths. And yet they never said by Telesur that this was caused by neoliberal destabilization or anything. Right? Because it was only, they blamed it on a right-wing government run by fascists, basically. So 38 people die in Honduras, which is wrong. And I do want Honduras to restore their democratic rights. But if you really want to be honest, Nicaragua is a poorer country, and Nicaragua is a country where there's more people dying, and Nicaragua is the country where people are more likely to continue to die. than in Honduras. And I hope, for the sake of both countries, that we do see a restoration of democracy there, because it just hasn't been happening. So, with the new canal deal with China, also, Panama is going to experience probably a spike in their GDP. Whereas Nicaragua, which, again, if you look at this graph, Nicaragua is trailing way behind. They're a sixth of the size of Guatemala. They're a fifth of the size of Costa Rica, and they're not going to grow anymore. Obviously, because of the current unrest, they're not going to continue growing. So, let's not beat around the bush here. These are irregular times, but this is nonsense about them talking about, oh, it's growing. So let's keep going. What he says also is, but above all, it's the rich, it's the bourgeoisie, the landed class, who have since invested in agriculture and banking, who have done very, very well out of this. And Ortega himself is reputed to have made quite a lot of money, as have some of the other Sandinista leaders, although nothing on the scale of Nicaragua's richest man, who's reputed to have a fortune of about $2.5 billion. But it doesn't mean that most people have not done all that well out of this, and most families have survived by having at least one person who's gone to the United States or Costa Rica in order to work and send home money. So realize this: there's people moving over the border into Costa Rica, which is relatively more well off than Nicaragua, and they're making more money and sending it back to Nicaragua. Or there's people coming here. So where's this idea of a big, everybody's saying, this is all caused by neoliberalism or whatever. And no, it's not. It's not caused by neoliberalism. And this is why I say, okay, so let's get this clear. The people that have most benefited from Ortega's tenure as president are in his words, Evan's words, the bourgeoisie, the landed class, and the rich. Therefore, why would they want to overthrow him? Shouldn't they be happy for him to stay in power? This statement by Evans, who himself penned a piece analyzing this disintegration of the Nicaraguan system from a left-wing perspective, includes an admission that Ortega has profited from his time in power, and instead of it benefiting the poor, many of them have to migrate elsewhere, including to the United States. And this is what he says in his article. He says, at the general election in 2016, when the FSLN principal candidates Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo obtained 72% of the vote, the turnout was reportedly low, as many people, including FSLN supporters, apparently considered the result to be a foregone conclusion. In the vote for the National Assembly, the FSLN obtained 70 out of 91 seats, with 14 seats going to Ortega's tamed opposition, the PLC. It's funny, in school, PLC is programmable logical controller. So, that's a little nerdy thing I'll throw in. Ortega himself makes relatively few public appearances, and there are unofficial reports that he is in poor health. Murillo, who is already playing an important role in coordinating the work of different government ministries, has come to play an increasing role in managing the day-to-day government of the country. Virtually all ministerial announcements are now made by Murillo, his wife, usually during a regular midday radio broadcast, and the mayors of the FSLN-controlled municipalities are required to attend regular meetings with her in Managua. She has also built a strong base of support in the Sandinista youth movement, which has an important presence in the universities. So you're talking about, basically, this is the same thing, the same exact thing that happened in Romania. Where Elena Ceausescu became basically the vice president of Romania. She was the face of Romania's regime, and people ended up hating her more than they hated Ceausescu himself. And I wouldn't be surprised if people were thinking the same thing about Rosario Murillo. It's the same thing. When you put your wife in power in order to manage your affairs because you're becoming weaker and older and more incapacitated, you better be careful. Because people will start blaming her blaming you for things that she's done. Okay, let's see if there's any comments. I rate Latin countries' economy and how many street tacos per dollar. Okay. I mean, I don't think that there's really a metric for that. Yeah, Larry, I do. Yeah, I do know that. I had the audio off. I don't call it a growing economy when you can, but 18 street tacos for $1. So the same joke. Audio is fine. Let me try a reload. Yeah, then Jeffrey Allen Johnson. Yeah, you got to inject that into it. I mean, come on, man. Larry Gerke says, yo, bold like a leopard. H.A. Goodman was talking about Gary Byrne yesterday and filing suit against Hillary Rodham Clinton, the DNC, and everything. You know, I would like to know. You know, H.A. Goodman, I've sent him a lot of messages to cover the Mattis file, and he's never responded to me. So if you guys could get on his ass, and not just get on his ass, send him the links to the Mattis file, which are in the description. So open those links, send them to him, and tell him to cover that. He never responds to anything. I also, by the way, I sent him, when I interviewed Gary Byrne, I said he should interview him too. Why not? And I did. I sent him all the time. I sent him messages, you know, never responds to anything I do. And I'm a big fan of his. Alan Johnson, I smell a Nobel Prize in economics. Yeah, that's so. You know, these are people that they pick somebody who actually substantiates my point. You know, that Nicaragua is basically, it's a totalitarian state, becoming one. I wouldn't say that it's totally reached that point, but it's similar to Romania during the Cold War. You know, it's a family dictatorship. They also, you know, they claim to be communists, they claim to be socialists, but they sell out those very ideals because they're concentrating power in their own hands. And then they benefit the rich in a different way. You know, they'll raise taxes, and what do the rich end up doing in that country? They end up squirreling away some of, you know, when they can, they'll bribe the Nicaraguan government and send some of that money over to other countries. You know, capital flight. They'll remember, Nicaragua is in the Caribbean. You can pretty much hop a flight to Curacao or one of the other countries in that region. Curacao is part of Dutch territory. You fly to the Caymans too. Squirrel away a lot of money if you can get it in cash. H.A. is very leery of anyone. He's had pieces written on him. Listen, I want you guys to know, if you can get him to cover the Mattis file, just tell him he won't regret it. Because this is exactly what he's always talked about. And I've talked to what's his name, Jamarl Thomas. He knows Jamarl Thomas, and Jamarl Thomas has covered this story. The hard bastard. I've told him to tell H.A. Goodman, and I haven't received a response from anyone yet. And you know, this is really a difficult fight for me because, you know, I want people from all sides of the aisle to understand the deception that the liberal media has performed against progressives, against conservatives, against people who are politically neutral, against other liberals. It's a deception regarding the Russia hoax. And that's why, you know, I go through this point by point. I'm not being unfair to these people from the Real News Network too, though, and I don't like them. But I'm trying to be fair to them by analyzing them point by point. It's taken a long time. It's probably going to end up taking 2 hours, looks like. My original goal was an hour and a half. Larry Gerke, but what does Lionel say about it? Lionel never, I've stopped even, I'll watch his recorded videos. His live streams are a waste of time because it's all about Q, and I'll tell you the problem with Lionel Nation. If you put a Q hashtag in front of something, it's like, you know, he found the fucking Fort Knox. That's his problem. So I don't care anymore. Like, I'm not going to, I don't have a Q in front of my name. I just look at the story and I work on it. And I don't give a shit what he says anymore. I respect his opinions as far as legal stuff and things like that. I'm not gonna cuss him out and attack him personally, but he's done. You do so much to try to expose things, and then he says, "Well, I don't really care about what's happening outside of the country," or or no, I don't care if it's a joke, Larry Gerke. I want to vent on this for a second. Lionel Nation tells you to send him stuff, and then you send it to him. You never hear a response. You send him something like I did send him the Matters report, by the way. Never received a response. I understand he has a lot of email, but the fact of the matter is that if you read through what I'd uncovered there, you could poke a major hole through the bow of the corporate media, and I don't care anymore. Yeah. So let's get on with this. We don't have much left to go.
Ortega himself is reputed to have made quite a lot of money, as have some of the other Sandinista leaders, although nothing on the scale of Nicaragua's richest man, who threatened to have a fortune of about $2.5 billion. But it does mean that most people have not done all that well out of this boom, and most families have survived by having at least one person who's gone to the United States or Costa Rica in order to work and send home money. So despite this growth, most people have not done very well out of the economy. And on top of that, they've seen Ortega appearing to manipulate the election results.
So despite this growth, most people have not done very well out of the economy. And on top of that, they've seen Ortega appearing to manipulate the election results. In 2016, the last presidential election, a large number of people didn't vote, and the figures are controversial, but all reports indicate that many of the voting booths didn't have the queues outside as they normally would. So people have been distancing themselves from Ortega, from the government, and it appears that even people who have traditionally supported Ortega and the Sandinistas didn't go vote in 2016 because Ortega, a couple of months before the election, got the electoral court to strip the main opposition coalition of its right to stand. So it was a clear, uncontested win for him. There's nothing Evans says that vindicates the current government of Nicaragua, and I do credit Gregory Wilpert for having him on. However, notice the central points that he makes to summarize the segment. The economic growth in Nicaragua is largely benefiting the rich. And by the way, that growth is going to be over soon. Are the union guys managing your sound? A nice one, buddy. The last election did not draw wide participation in Nicaragua, and in fact, to back up Evans doubting its integrity, the Carter Center, which is relied upon typically to monitor elections, was barred entry to the country in 2016, according to its own press release. So here, and for those of you, the Carter Center, if you accuse them of being, dependent on the OAS, there is no mention of the OAS in this one. This is the same thing. The guy before was saying, the guy who's been criticizing me was saying, oh, you believe the OAS? They're a right-wing imperialist. What does the OAS have to do with this one? This was from June 7th, 2016. President Daniel Ortega has closed the door to international observation of national elections to be held on November 6, 2016, despite the clamor for observation by a majority of the Nicaraguan people. In an attack on the international community, President Ortega rejected an opportunity to confirm Nicaragua's adherence to democratic standards of electoral processes that provide guarantees to citizens and encourage participation. The Carter Center has observed 102 elections across the globe, including 4 in Nicaragua between 1990 and 2006. With integrity and support for democratic practices. We have welcomed the possibility of observing this year's elections in Nicaragua and lament this decision to ignore a key component of Nicaragua's own electoral law. He hired some guy out of work Pakistani IT guy from DC to fix his audio. That's a good joke. Is Pinochet is just a big fan? As big a It's great to have an audience like you guys. That's all I can say. To add to the things that Evans has not mentioned, please note that Ortega's changing of the Constitution to be able to run for unlimited terms was not his only power grab. In 2016, the Nicaraguan Electoral Council sacked 28 members of Congress from the opposition because they refused to let Ortega's friendly Supreme Court appoint an Ortega crony as their party leader. In every possible way, Ortega has reversed the separation of powers reforms done under his successor from his first term in the 1990s, Violeta Chamorro. I'd like to thank my critic for giving me the opportunity to show him how actual research is done. Many of the sources I have used here are actual Latin American news and media, as opposed to a supposedly independent news network from Baltimore. And if you think that I use those quotation marks by mistake, prepare for my next segment. So I want people to understand this, that the real news network is not independent. And it's largely not even news. It's an opinion network that promotes the vision of Venezuela to foreign audiences. Okay, it's basically a low rent version of Telesur TV, and I will go into that a different time. I want to thank you guys for joining in. I'll mention your guys' names: Metadata Man, Jeffrey Allen Johnson, Larry Gerke, Arjun, Pinochet. Reven Starkiller was here earlier. If he's still here, I'll say goodbye. Who else is here? John Sislowski. Can't forget him. I think that's all of you. Oh, and vote red in November. So that's it. I want you guys to have a great rest of your Friday. I don't think I'm going to have any more things today. Bold bastards. The guy who was smashing cell phones on his porch with a hammer. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. I might edit this video because of the sound parts and everything, but other than that, I want you to enjoy it. I want you to share this. I want you to like this channel, subscribe to this channel, share it with people, comment below. And, this is a project that I work on. A lot of people don't give a fuck about Nicaragua because they think, there's a lot of shitty places around the world that people are suffering. So what does it matter? Well, a lot of the people that are coming here, and you see it in our news, they want to get into America. Well, sorry. If you don't analyze why they're coming here, then you have to shut the fuck up and stop complaining. We like your live chats almost as much as Abby Martin's. I don't think she has live chats, so I guess that's a pretty nice insult. I'm worse than something that doesn't exist. But thank you. Have a good rest of your Friday.